Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere slightly more modern, slightly more neon lit, and somehow still deeply chaotic. Silicon Valley in the 1880s. The land of beige computers, humming server rooms, corporate ambition, and programmers who believed sleep was optional but caffeine absolutely was not. This is not the polished world of sleek laptops and meditation apps. No, this is the early frontier of tech where the code is buggy, the computers are the size of refrigerators, and half the engineers are surviving on vending machine burritos, cold pizza, and substances that would make your modern HR department faint. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I create here. And thank you for suggesting this topic. It was such a fun one to explore. Leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's drifting off to sleep all around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, get comfortable, and let's ease into tonight's strange little journey together. Because tonight we're stepping into the life of a very specific creature, the 1880s Silicon Valley programmer. Have you ever wondered what it actually felt like to build the early tech world? What did programmers eat when deadlines lasted 3 days straight? How much coffee can a human body consume before becoming legally classified as a hummingbird? What exactly happens to your brain after 48 hours of debugging assembly code? And why were so many of these sleep-deprived engineers casually doing lines of cocaine in office bathrooms while writing the software that would quietly shape the future of civilization? Would you survive working in a startup where nobody really knows what they're doing, but everyone is absolutely certain they're about to become a billionaire? Could you function inside a fluorescent-lit office where the computers sound like jet engines and the only soundtrack is keyboards clacking at 2:30 a.m? Would you last a week living on donuts, Diet Coke, and the terrifying optimism of venture capitalists? And most importantly, could you survive being a programmer in the wild, experimental, slightly insane tech frontier of the 1880s? Well, congratulations. You've just woken up in Silicon Valley. The year is 1886. Your computer weighs 40 pounds. Your boss is wearing suspenders and talking about changing the world, and you haven't slept since Tuesday. Good luck. You wake up in the middle of Silicon Valley sometime in the mid-1880s, and the first thing you notice is that the entire region smells faintly like solder, printer toner, and ambition. This place isn't the polished tech empire people imagine today. It's still half orchards, half office parks, filled with young engineers who look like they accidentally wandered out of a physics lab and never went home. Everyone is building something: operating systems, networking hardware, databases, or mysterious software platforms that nobody quite understands yet. What they do understand is that the future might be hiding inside these beige machines, and you're about to spend the next 16 hours staring at one. Outside, the California sun is shining with that relaxed, laid-back confidence people associate with beaches and convertibles. But inside these office buildings, the atmosphere feels more like a graduate physics exam that never ends. Fluorescent lights buzz softly overhead. The air conditioners hum. Somewhere down the hallway, a printer is screeching like an angry robot trying to escape its enclosure. Welcome to your new habitat. Let's talk about the geography for a moment. Despite the name Silicon Valley, you're not waking up inside some futuristic cyber city filled with glowing skyscrapers and flying cars. The valley is still mostly suburban. Quiet roads lined with low office buildings, parking lots full of sensible sedans, fruit orchards that haven't quite been replaced by tech campuses yet. It's a strange mix of agriculture and ambition. One moment you're driving past apricot trees, the next moment you're pulling into a parking lot where a group of 20-something programmers are trying to build the software that might define the next decade of computing. Inside the offices, the scene is even stranger. Rows of beige computer terminals sit on desks like obedient little appliances from the future. Thick cables snake across the floor, Whiteboards are covered with diagrams that look suspiciously like someone attempted to explain the universe using rectangles and arrows. And the people. Ah, yes, the people. Silicon Valley in the 1880s is not full of sleek entrepreneurs wearing expensive suits. It is full of engineers. The kind of engineers who forget to eat lunch because they are arguing about memory allocation. You see oversized glasses, messy hair, t-shirts from obscure university departments, jeans that have clearly been worn through several all-night coding sessions. Everyone looks slightly tired. Not dramatically tired, just permanently tired, the way you look when your brain has spent too many nights trying to convince a stubborn computer to cooperate. Let's pause here for a second. Have you ever tried explaining a complicated idea to someone who refuses to listen? Now imagine that someone is a computer. That's programming in the 1880s. The machines are powerful for their time, but they are not forgiving. One tiny mistake in your code can cause the entire program to crash. A missing character can ruin hours of work. A misplaced bracket can transform your brilliant software into a confused electronic potato. So the programmers sit and type and stare at the screen and type again. Time starts to blur inside these buildings. Morning becomes afternoon. Afternoon becomes evening. Someone orders pizza. Someone else brings in another pot of coffee strong enough to revive small mammals. Outside, the orchards are quiet. The sun sets over the Santa Cruz Mountains. Inside, the keyboards keep clicking. Because everyone here believes something slightly insane. They believe the future is being written in this room, not by politicians, not by billionaires, but by a group of slightly awkward engineers who spend most of their day arguing about software architecture. It's a strange belief, but in Silicon Valley, strange beliefs are kind of the whole business model. And now congratulations, you're one of them. Your workplace is a rectangular office building that looks less like the birthplace of the digital future and more like a dentist's clinic designed by accountants. Inside, however, sits the true heart of the operation. Enormous beige computers humming loudly enough to be mistaken for industrial air conditioners. These machines are fragile, expensive, and deeply temperamental. They run on floppy disks the size of dinner plates and store less information than your modern microwave. Yet somehow, every programmer here treats them like sacred artifacts. You don't question the machine. You feed it code and hope it doesn't crash again. Let's step inside your office for a moment. The room is filled with terminals, chunky monitors with thick glass screens that glow a soft green or amber. They sit on heavy desks beside keyboards that sound like tiny typewriters every time someone presses a key. Each click echoes slightly through the room, creating a strange rhythm, a constant mechanical tapping that never quite stops. This is the sound of progress, or at least the sound of people desperately trying to make progress. The computer itself isn't even on your desk. Oh no, that would be far too convenient. The real machine is usually tucked away in another room entirely, connected to your terminal by a web of cables. Somewhere behind a locked door sits a large system unit the size of a washing machine, humming quietly like a patient metal beast. You interact with it from afar, which, honestly, might be for the best. Because if programmers had direct physical access to the main computer every time their code failed, there would be significantly more incidents involving frustrated kicking. Now, let's talk about the floppy disk. Ah, yes, the floppy disk. The sacred little square of plastic that holds your entire project. It's thin, flexible, and somehow both incredibly important and suspiciously unreliable at the same time. Inside the disk is a tiny magnetic surface where your precious code lives. Entire software programs, thousands of lines of logic, rest quietly on this fragile little square. And if something goes wrong, well, let's just say the word backup begins to feel very important. Programmers carry floppy disks the way medieval monks carried sacred scrolls, carefully labelled, stored in plastic sleeves, never placed too close to magnets, coffee cups, or anything else capable of destroying weeks of work in a single tragic moment. Now, the machines themselves are not exactly friendly. Modern computers are polite. They have colourful screens, helpful messages, and friendly icons that gently guide you through problems. These computers, not so much. When something goes wrong, and something always goes wrong, the machine responds with a message that feels less like assistance and more like quiet judgment. Error. Just that. Sometimes with a mysterious number attached, as if the computer is grading your failure. You stare at the screen stares back. Somewhere down the hall, another programmer sighs loudly. Someone else mutters something about memory allocation in the tone usually reserved for discussing ancient curses. Let's pause here for a moment. Have you ever tried assembling furniture with instructions written in another language? Now imagine the furniture occasionally explodes if you tighten the wrong screw. That's programming these machines. And yet despite all this frustration, there's a strange reverence surrounding them. Because these beige boxes are powerful. Not by modern standards, of course. Today your phone contains thousands of times more computing power. But in the 1880s, these machines represent something extraordinary. They can simulate complex systems. They can connect distant computers through early networks. They can run programs that might one day transform entire industries. So the programmers treat them with a mix of respect and quiet fear. You don't yell at the machine. Well, not loudly. You don't slam the keyboard. Usually. Instead, you sit patiently at the glowing screen, typing commands one line at a time, hoping that this time, just maybe, the computer will do exactly what you asked. And when it finally works, the entire room feels a little bit like a cathedral where a miracle just happened. Because inside this strange temple of humming beige computers, every successful program feels like divine intervention. If you look around the office, you'll notice something fascinating. Absolutely nobody here is dressed for success. The unofficial Silicon Valley uniform consists of faded jeans, sneakers, oversized glasses, and the distant stare of someone who hasn't slept properly since the Reagan administration began. This isn't fashion, it's survival. When your job requires writing code until 3 a.m., ironing shirts becomes a luxury activity. Everyone looks like they just rolled out of bed because most of them actually did. Let's take a moment to truly absorb the aesthetic. In modern times, tech workers wear hoodies, sneakers, and the occasional espresso-stained t-shirt. But back in the 1880s, the prototype was already here, just rougher, sleepier, and with significantly worse fabric quality. The typical programmer outfit consists of jeans so worn they've developed the consistency of soft cardboard, t-shirts advertising obscure computer clubs, flannel thrown over everything like a warm, unreliable blanket. It's a look that says, I haven't seen the sun in 48 hours and honestly I don't miss it. And the glasses. Oh, the glasses. Thick lenses, thick frames, and the unmistakable glint of someone who has spent far too long staring at a glowing monitor filled with error codes. These aren't just glasses, they're battle armor. They protect the eyes from the harsh, unflattering fluorescent lighting, and from the emotional trauma of watching your program crash for the 10th time today. Let's not forget the hair. The hairstyles of Silicon Valley programmers are a study in entropy. Some haven't met a comb since their last job interview. Others sport curls that are attempting to escape the gravitational pull of the office. A few brave souls tie their hair back with rubber bands, spare Ethernet cables, or whatever else is lying around. When you exist in a perpetual state of half-conscious coding, fashion becomes less about personal expression and more about keeping your follicles out of the keyboard. Now, footwear. Programmers wear sneakers that have clearly been through things, emotional things. These shoes have sprinted across parking lots, stepped on half-eaten vending machine snacks, and carried their wearer through countless late-night debugging marathons. Some pairs look like they were originally white, but have since absorbed enough coffee spills and printer dust to become a vague greyish brown. Others are held together with duct tape and hope, and then there's the posture. You can always spot a programmer by the way they walk, slightly hunched as if still tethered to their monitor by invisible code strings. Their shoulders have become permanently rounded from leaning over terminals. Their necks tilt forward at a concerning angle, an early prototype of the condition we now lovingly call tech neck. But the most important part of the programmer uniform isn't the clothes, the glasses, or the sneakers. It's the vibe. Every programmer carries an invisible accessory, existential fatigue. It's the quiet awareness that their entire job revolves around communicating with machines that do not care about their emotional well-being. The fatigue manifests in subtle ways, long pauses before answering questions, sighs that sound like they've travelled through several layers of reality, and an expression that says, "I could fix the entire global network infrastructure if you'd just give me 5 minutes and a fresh pot of coffee." Let's pause here for a second. Have you ever put on an outfit that wasn't flattering, wasn't stylish, but just felt right for the kind of day you were about to have? That's the programmer uniform. It's not about sending a message to the world. It's about telling the world, please don't talk to me until I finish debugging this. The beauty of the uniform is its honesty. Nobody here is pretending to be refined or glamorous. Instead, they dress like people who spend more time thinking about algorithms than accessories. Their shirts may be wrinkled, their socks mismatched, and their hair unintentionally wild, but every wrinkle and stain carries the story of a problem solved at 2 a.m, or a breakthrough that arrived just as the sun was rising over the valley. This is Silicon Valley, not sleek, not polished, just people in jeans and glasses quietly building the digital skeleton of the future, one existentially fatigued outfit at a time. Before you write a single line of code, you must visit the most important machine in the building, the coffee pot. In Silicon Valley, coffee isn't just a drink, it's infrastructure. Programmers consume it in terrifying quantities, not because they enjoy it, but because debugging software at midnight requires chemical assistance. By mid-morning, half the office is vibrating at frequencies normally reserved for power tools. Let's take a closer look at this legendary device. The office coffee pot is not elegant. It is not sleek. It is not, by any modern standard, sanitary. It's a stained glass carafe sitting atop a heating plate that has been slowly burning the same black sludge since sunrise. The pot emits a faint smell of roasted beans, metal fatigue, and the whisper of dreams lost during an all-night coding session. But this machine is holy, at least to programmers. Every morning a line forms, not an orderly line, more of a sleepy, half-conscious shuffle. Programmers drift toward the pot like migrating animals following some ancient caffeine-based instinct. Nobody speaks, nobody smiles. Everyone simply waits their turn to pour a cup of what is affectionately referred to as developer fuel, even though it tastes like overcooked despair. Let's be honest, this is not gourmet coffee. This is medieval potion making with electricity. The grounds are cheap. The filter often collapses under stress, and the machine hisses ominously like it's judging your life choices. Sometimes the brew is strong enough to melt through the cup. Other times it resembles brown water and sadness. But the effect is immediate. You take one sip. Suddenly you're awake enough to notice that your left eyelid has begun twitching. Your heart starts tapping out a rhythm that suggests it has just read your upcoming deadlines. Your brain, still half asleep, jolts forward like a startled deer being asked to recite assembly code on command. Let's pause for a moment. Have you ever been so tired that even your tiredness feels tired? That's why programmers don't just drink coffee. They rely on it the way ancient sailors relied on the North Star. It's not optional. It's navigation. Because the moment caffeine enters the system, something magical happens. Problems that seemed impossible 10 minutes ago suddenly become mildly manageable. Bug reports begin to make sense. That one function you misunderstood all week suddenly reveals its secrets as if caffeine has performed a tiny exorcism on your code. Coffee is the bridge between despair and productivity, and the office knows it. That's why there's always a backup pot brewing, sometimes 2. On especially cursed days, 3. The sound of the coffee machine percolating becomes white noise, blending seamlessly with the clacking keyboards, the humming computers, and the occasional sigh from someone who realized they forgot a semicolon and ruined everything. Some programmers take their coffee with cream and sugar. Others drink it black, like the void they've been staring into since last night's debugging session. A rare few mix it with powdered creamer that expired during the Carter administration. These people should not be trusted. Then there are the caffeine extremists. You'll recognize them by the way they carry 2 cups at once, their hands trembling slightly as they type at speeds that defy ergonomic guidance. They are legends. They are terrifying. They have not slept since Tuesday. And if you ask them how they're doing, they'll give you a detailed explanation of the entire memory architecture of the new operating system without blinking. But coffee isn't just a drink here. It's social glue. Programmers gather around the machine like villagers around a communal fire. This is where gossip spreads. This is where alliances form. This is where someone finally explains, quietly and with great emotional pain, that the server crashed at 2 a.m. because Gary forgot to close a bracket. Coffee breaks are therapy sessions disguised as hydration. You sip, stare into your cup, and mentally prepare yourself for another battle with the machine. You commiserate with co-workers about deadlines, bugs, and how your code compiled on the 3rd try, which is basically a miracle in this economy. By late afternoon, the coffee pot has been refilled so many times it begins making noises that suggest it is nearing retirement. Programmers keep drinking anyway. At this point, caffeine is the only thing preventing them from becoming permanent office furniture. And as night falls, something incredible happens. The coffee evolves. It transforms from a morning ritual into a survival tool. 1 cup becomes 2, 2 becomes 4. The office starts buzzing with caffeinated determination. And somewhere around 11 p.m. someone announces, with a confidence available only to the heavily dosed, that they have a breakthrough idea that will absolutely fix everything. It will not. But the coffee believes. And so do you, because in Silicon Valley, code may build the future, but coffee is what keeps the builders alive long enough to write it. Now it's time to sit down at your terminal and begin coding. Unfortunately, programming in the 1880s is less like typing elegant logic and more like performing delicate surgery on a stubborn calculator. Every line of code must be perfect. One tiny mistake can crash the entire system. So you type slowly, carefully, until the computer responds with an error message so cryptic it might as well say, "Nice try, genius." Let's take a deep breath, because this is where your real emotional journey begins. Your terminal glows softly in front of you, that signature green text blinking like a tiny heartbeat. There are no user-friendly icons, no autocomplete, no error hints gently guiding your hand. This is raw, unfiltered programming. Just you, a keyboard, and a computer that will happily ruin your day for sport. You stretch your fingers and begin typing your first line of code. The keys click loudly, each one echoing through the quiet office like you're sending Morse code from the front lines. And in a way, you are. Every keystroke feels like a negotiation with an ancient machine god who only accepts offerings in the form of syntactically perfect commands. The moment you press enter, you wait. You don't breathe, you don't blink, you watch the cursor, and then, error, just that. No explanation, no suggestion, no friendly red underline telling you where you messed up. The machine simply declares that you have failed, again and again and again. The error message sits there, smug and mysterious, like the computer is whispering, "I know what you did wrong, but do you?" Let's pause here for a second. Have you ever put together a piece of furniture and realised the last screw doesn't fit? Which means none of the other screws were correct either, and you must now question every decision you've made since childhood. That's 1880s programming. You delete a line, rewrite it, delete it again, rewrite it again. You stare at the screen until the text starts to look like ancient hieroglyphics describing your slow descent into madness. Somewhere in the office, someone groans loudly because they too have reached the stage of code-induced existential dread. You try again. This time you're careful, so careful you begin typing with the caution of a bomb technician. Every character matters. Too many spaces, it crashes. Too few, it crashes. Wrong variable name, system meltdown. Use a semicolon instead of a colon. Congratulations, you've created new and exciting failure conditions. And remember, this isn't just your project. Your code might be part of a larger program, something your whole team is building together, which means if your section crashes, it drags everyone down like a faulty elevator cable. This is why programmers drink so much coffee. Eventually you get bold. You write more than one line at a time. A whole function even. Something elegant, something efficient, something you're genuinely proud of. You hit run. The screen freezes. The terminal flickers. For a moment you swear you hear the computer whisper, "You fool." Then the entire program collapses in on itself like a dying star. You lean back in your chair. Your soul exits your body. Somewhere a printer screams in the distance. Someone from marketing walks by cheerfully, unaware that you are emotionally shattered because a loop didn't loop properly. But here's the thing no one tells you. This is the process. Every programmer in this building is locked in the same silent battle. They write, they hope, they fail, they try again. It's a mixture of stubbornness, creativity, and questionable life choices. And eventually, after enough trial and error, something finally works. Your program compiles, your output appears, no errors. For a moment you feel invincible, you feel brilliant. You feel like you have bent the universe to your will using nothing but a keyboard and overwhelming spite. It lasts approximately 14 seconds, because then you notice something else is broken. Another function crashes, another task fails, another bug scurries out from the shadows like a gremlin demanding attention. You sigh, roll up your already rolled sleeves and lean forward to fight again. Because this is what programming truly is. Not perfection, not elegance, just stubborn humans wrestling with stubborn machines until one of them finally gives up. And spoiler, it's usually you. Soon you discover the programmer's greatest enemy. Bugs. Not the cute kind that crawl around gardens, but invisible logical errors hiding inside thousands of lines of code. Fixing them requires patience, focus, and occasionally whispering threats at your monitor. Hours pass. The office grows quiet. The coffee pot empties again. Somewhere down the hall, someone shouts triumphantly because their program compiled without crashing. Welcome to the most psychologically demanding part of the programmer's day. Debugging is not an activity. Debugging is an emotional state. It begins with optimism, "I can fix this," and slowly descends into confusion, bargaining, and the vague sense that your computer is mocking you. You stare at your code, and it stares back like a cryptic riddle carved into stone by a monk who really enjoyed suffering. Let's start with the first stage of debugging, denial. You run your program expecting it to behave. You believe in it. You raised it carefully, line by line, like a fragile digital houseplant. But instead of performing its gentle little task, it crashes instantly. Not even a dramatic crash. A rude one. A crash so fast it feels like the computer slapped your hand away and said, "Try again when you're ready." You think, maybe I mistyped something. You scroll, you scan the code, Everything looks fine. That's the danger. Bugs love looking fine. Then comes stage 2. Anger. You tighten your jaw. You run the program again, even though you know it's not going to magically fix itself out of respect for your feelings. The error message flashes across the screen, cryptic, cold, and unhelpful. Something like segmentation, fault, or undefined behavior, or error 47. A favourite because nobody knows what error 47 means, not even the machine. At this point, you begin whispering to the computer, not kind things. You accuse it of betrayal. You remind it how many hours you've spent typing code into its ungrateful circuits. You threaten to unplug it and let it think about what it's done. The computer remains unmoved. Now we enter stage 3, investigation. This stage involves scrolling slowly through your code, as if you're dusting through crime scene evidence. You examine each line, each function call, each variable. You mutter, "Why are you like this?" Not entirely sure whether you're speaking to the code or yourself. Then, inevitably, you find something suspicious. A stray parenthesis, an off by 1 error, a variable name you spelled correctly for 3 pages, and then misspelled in the most crucial place possible. You fix it. You run the program. You wait, and it crashes again. That's when stage 4 begins. Despair. You slump in your chair. You rub your temples. You stare into the middle distance like a character in a documentary about workplace burnout. Hours slip by. Daylight fades. Your reflection in the monitor begins to look concerned for your well-being. Around you, the office has become unnervingly quiet, broken only by the gentle hum of machines and the occasional gulp of someone drinking coffee like it's emergency medicine. You begin to suspect you may never solve this bug, that you may age here, that the year is now 1887 and you will not live to see 1888. But then miraculously comes stage 5, clarity. It arrives suddenly, usually after staring at the same line for 40 minutes. Something clicks. A tiny spark of understanding flares in your brain. You see the problem. It was obvious. Painfully obvious. The kind of obvious that makes you want to put your head down on the keyboard and let out a muffled scream. Maybe you referenced the wrong pointer. Maybe your loop needed to end 1 iteration earlier. Maybe you forgot a semicolon because you blinked at the wrong moment. Whatever it is, you fix it. You hold your breath. You run the program again. And this time it works. The output appears clean, perfect, unbroken, like a choir of angels singing from inside the terminal. For a moment you ascend spiritually. Your soul leaves your body. You consider writing a memoir about overcoming adversity. You imagine explaining the problem at conferences, casually downplaying how close you came to tearfully giving up and becoming a goat farmer. And then, as the wave of triumph washes over you, a new message appears. Warning, another bug detected. Because debugging never truly ends. It just pauses long enough for you to refill your coffee and plunge back into the digital abyss one more time. Around 7 p.m, a strange transformation occurs. Normal office workers go home, but programmers stay. Pizza boxes appear. Music starts playing quietly from someone's cassette player. This is when the real work begins. Silicon Valley in the 1880s runs on all-nighters, fueled by caffeine, adrenaline, and the vague belief that the next breakthrough might happen at 2:17 a.m. This is not just overtime. This is a ritual. As the sun sets outside, the fluorescent lights take over, humming softly like tired bees. The office air shifts. It becomes heavier, warmer, saturated with the scent of tomato sauce, solder, and collective determination. The day shift world feels orderly and structured, but the night belongs to the programmers. Those brave, sleep-deprived explorers mapping the uncharted wilderness of early computing. The first stage of the all-nighter is deceptively calm. Someone reheats leftover coffee. Someone else cracks open a can of cola, even though they've already reached their daily sugar limit sometime before lunch. The music is soft, usually synth pop, classic rock, or whatever someone recorded off the radio last week. People speak in quieter tones now, as if raising their voices might disturb whatever delicate ideas float in the air. By 8 p.m, the energy shifts again. The pizza arrives, thin cardboard box after thin cardboard box steaming slightly, cheese sliding toward one corner like it's trying to escape responsibility. The programmers descend on it instantly. It's not a meal, it's fuel, consumed standing up. One hand on the greasy slice and the other already reaching back for the keyboard. Let's pause here for a moment. Have you ever tried solving a complex problem at 9 p.m. on a Wednesday, running purely on carbs and raw determination? Now imagine doing that every week. That's the all-nighter mindset. Around 9:30 p.m, productivity hits a surprising peak. The world outside grows darker, quieter, and the office becomes a kind of isolated bubble where time feels elastic. You type with purpose now. The distractions of daylight, meetings, phone calls, managers casually wandering over to check in are gone. It's just you, the code, and the eerie calm of a building slowly emptying of life. This is when breakthroughs often appear. A new idea sparks, a solution becomes clear, a bug finally reveals its hiding place. You feel brilliant, unstoppable, even heroic. Then 11 p.m. hits. This is when the second stage begins. Delirious collaboration. Someone wheels their chair over to your desk, not walking, mind you, wheeling, because at this hour walking is for amateurs. They look at your screen and nod thoughtfully, then offer a suggestion that somehow manages to sound both insightful and completely incomprehensible. You consider it anyway because at 11 p.m, all ideas sound like possible genius. Laughter breaks out across the office for no apparent reason. Someone tells a joke that is only funny because everyone is too exhausted to resist. Someone else starts sketching a diagram on the whiteboard that looks more like a treasure map than a technical plan. Midnight arrives quietly. The music gets softer. A few people take short naps under their desks, curled up like house cats in the warm glow of the computers. Others lean back in their chairs, staring at the ceiling as though the fluorescent bulbs might whisper the answers to their algorithmic nightmares. At 1 a.m, the office enters the mystical zone. This is when the air feels different, charged with possibility. You sip cold coffee, your eyes sting, your fingers ache, but your brain hums in that strangely heightened state between exhaustion and creativity. Ideas you would normally dismiss begin to feel profound. Solutions emerge from tangled thoughts like constellations appearing in a dark sky. And yes, somewhere around 2:17 a.m, someone always gasps, "Wait, I think I got it." Everyone perks up despite the hour. Screens glow brighter. Keys click faster. You and your team ride the wave of collective momentum, hoping desperately that this breakthrough doesn't crash and burn in the harsh light of morning. By 3 a.m, the final stage begins, survival mode. Your face feels numb. Your spine is negotiating a labour contract. You've forgotten what the sun looks like. Your code is starting to blur. You are one operator error away from emotionally unravelling, but you push on because you are so close. When dawn finally touches the tops of the office park buildings, the all-nighter ends not with triumph or fanfare, but with a quiet, exhausted exhale. The programme works, or it doesn't. Honestly, at 6 a.m, nobody can tell the difference. But you survived. You endured. You wrote code through the night like a digital monk preserving sacred knowledge. Because in 1880's Silicon Valley, the all-nighter isn't just tradition. It's the rite of passage that builds the future one bleary-eyed breakthrough at a time. Somewhere between debugging sessions, someone starts talking about stock options. Suddenly, the room fills with wild optimism. If this company succeeds, you might become incredibly wealthy. Maybe not today, maybe not next year, but someday. Silicon Valley thrives on this dream. Half the programmers here are underpaid today because they believe they're building tomorrow's empire. Let's take a step back and really understand this moment. You're sitting in a cramped office surrounded by pizza boxes, lukewarm coffee cups, and whiteboards covered in diagrams that look like the scribblings of a mathematician trapped in a fever dream. You're exhausted. Your code is misbehaving, and your chair feels like it was designed by someone who hates posture. Then someone says the magic word, stock, and suddenly the room glows with a different kind of energy. Not fluorescent light, but hope. Wild, irrational, caffeine-fueled hope. Because in Silicon Valley, stock options are basically lottery tickets disguised as compensation. Instead of receiving a reasonable salary, you get a stack of hypothetical shares in a company that may or may not survive the next 6 months. But the idea is intoxicating. If your startup becomes the next big thing, you might become a millionaire simply by existing near the right whiteboard. It's financial fantasy at its finest. Let's talk about the psychology behind it. Everyone here is tired. Everyone is stressed. Everyone spends more time talking to computers than to other human beings. But the dream keeps them going. The dream that their code might turn into something world-changing, that their tiny company might someday be listed on the NASDAQ, that their 500 shares currently worth roughly the price of a sandwich might one day buy them a house. And for a moment you believe it too. You imagine a future where your bug-infested prototype turns into the backbone of an entire industry. You imagine your startup becoming a household name. You imagine yourself leaning back in a comfortable chair, one designed by someone who cares about posture this time, sipping coffee that wasn't brewed in a machine older than you and laughing gently at the memory of your underpaid youth. This fantasy spreads through the office like second-hand smoke. Someone starts calculating potential valuations on a napkin. Someone else draws a wild exponential growth graph on the whiteboard, even though nobody present fully understands what the y-axis represents. Another co-worker absolutely insists, that venture capitalists will be fighting each other for the chance to invest once your demo is ready. Let's pause here. Have you ever watched a group of exhausted adults convince themselves that eating one more slice of pizza will magically fix their problems? It's the same vibe. The dream becomes a bonding ritual. You're no longer just co-workers fighting bugs together. You're pioneers, visionaries, bold adventurers risking everything to build the future. At least that's how it feels at 11:30 p.m. when the caffeine is kicking in and the office heater is making everyone slightly delusional. But then reality taps you politely on the shoulder. You remember that your startup's office is actually a rented suite above a carpet cleaning business. Half your computers are held together with duct tape. The company's bank account balance could be written on a sticky note, and your CEO, bright, ambitious, and clearly high on optimism, just used the phrase "when we go global," even though your product currently fails to load half the time. Still nobody laughs, because this is Silicon Valley, and around here, ridiculous confidence isn't a flaw, it's currency. You watch your co-workers talk about the future with eyes that haven't reflected natural daylight in hours. Someone mentions retiring at 35. Someone else talks about buying a yacht despite having never stepped foot on a boat. A third person claims they'll buy a mansion in the hills and install a private server room just for fun. Are these realistic goals? Absolutely not. Does that matter? Absolutely not. Because the dream machine doesn't run on realism. It runs on possibility. Even if the odds are terrible, even if half of all startups collapse before they finish their first Christmas party, even if your product is currently held together with hope, duct tape, and an if statement that shouldn't work but somehow does. You believe. You have to. Otherwise you wouldn't survive the debugging, the all-nighters, the vending machine dinners, and the emotional trauma of fixing the same bug 6 times only to discover the problem was a missing colon in a completely different file. So you buy into the fantasy. You nod. You smile. You imagine that future yacht. Because here in 1880s Silicon Valley, the startup dream isn't just part of the job. It is the job. And the dream machine never stops running even when the computers do. Meet your co-workers. One is a brilliant programmer who hasn't changed his shirt in 3 days. Another communicates almost entirely in sarcasm and hexadecimal. A third appears to survive entirely on Diet Coke and sarcasm. This strange group of sleep-deprived engineers somehow manages to create revolutionary technology while arguing about Star Trek. Let's take a tour of the personalities you'll encounter in this ecosystem. First, there's the quiet genius. You know the one. He sits in the corner office cubicle, typing slowly but with unnerving precision. He rarely joins conversations. When he does speak, it's usually to say something terrifyingly insightful like, "The memory leak is probably in the 3rd pointer allocation inside the network module." Everyone stares. Because he's right. Nobody knows how he knows. He simply appears to possess an almost supernatural understanding of the codebase, as if he can see through the screen and directly into the computer's soul. He drinks coffee silently and occasionally disappears for long walks around the parking lot, presumably to commune with the algorithm gods. Then there's the debugging philosopher. This coworker treats programming less like a job and more like a spiritual journey. While everyone else frantically types commands, the philosopher leans back in their chair and begins asking unsettling questions. Is this bug truly an error, they might say slowly, or is it simply a misunderstanding between human intention and machine logic? You blink. They blink. The program still crashes. Next, we meet the hardware whisperer. While the rest of the team wrestles with software, this person talks lovingly about circuit boards. They know the exact temperature at which a processor performs best. They have strong emotional opinions about soldering techniques. If a computer stops working, they will open the case, poke around with a screwdriver, and bring it back to life like a medieval doctor performing experimental surgery. Sometimes it works. Sometimes smoke appears. Then there's the snack survivalist. This coworker has mastered the art of living entirely on vending machine food. Their desk drawer contains a carefully curated collection of granola bars, chips, candy, and something that might technically qualify as cheese if viewed under very forgiving lighting. They claim it's efficient. You suspect it's slowly dissolving their internal organs. But perhaps the most fascinating character is the late-night debater. Around midnight, when the caffeine has reached critical levels and everyone's brain begins operating in philosophical overdrive, this coworker starts discussions that spiral into absurd territory. What if, they say thoughtfully, the future of computing is decentralized networks connected across the world? Someone else counters, sure, but first we need to fix the printer driver. This inevitably leads to a 40-minute debate that begins with network protocols and somehow ends with someone passionately explaining why Captain Picard is the superior Starfleet captain. Let's pause here for a second. Have you ever noticed how exhausted people become strangely brilliant and strangely ridiculous at the same time? That's Silicon Valley office culture in the 1880s. Meetings are chaotic. Ideas bounce around like pinballs. Someone scribbles diagrams across the whiteboard while someone else erases them immediately because that's not how memory management works. Voices rise. Chairs roll across the floor. Someone bursts out laughing because the code comment they just wrote says, // this should work. Probably. But here's the strange part. Despite the chaos, things actually get built. Somehow this messy collection of personalities, introverts, dreamers, skeptics, caffeine addicts, manages to cooperate long enough to create systems that genuinely push technology forward. One person writes the core algorithm, another optimizes the performance, someone else finds the bug that nearly destroyed everything. The process looks ridiculous from the outside, but inside the room, it feels electric. Ideas spark unexpectedly, problems get solved in strange ways, and occasionally someone leans back in their chair and says very quietly, "Wait, I think we just figured something out." The room goes silent. Everyone looks at the screen, and for a moment the mild chaos fades into something remarkable. A group of slightly dishevelled engineers realising they've built something that didn't exist before, which, if you think about it, is exactly how most revolutions start. Not with perfect organisation, but with a room full of tired people arguing about Star Trek while accidentally inventing the future. By the mid-1880s, Silicon Valley has developed an unusual relationship with stimulants. The pressure is intense, deadlines are brutal, and some programmers decide caffeine alone simply isn't enough. Cocaine quietly appears at late-night parties, inside office bathrooms, and occasionally during marathon coding sessions. It's less about partying and more about pushing the human brain beyond reasonable operating limits. Now, to understand this, you have to picture the environment. You're in an office that hasn't slept in 2 days. The lights never turn off. The computers hum continuously like machines that forgot how to rest. Programmers shuffle between desks with the determined posture of people who know the next product demo is coming whether they're ready or not. Deadlines hang over the room like thunderclouds. Investors want progress. Managers want results. The software needs to ship, and the team has already consumed enough coffee to chemically qualify as a small rainforest, but the work doesn't stop. In fact, the longer the hours stretch, the more the atmosphere shifts. Around midnight, conversations become sharper. Ideas start flying faster. Everyone becomes hyper-focused on their screens, chasing bugs and breakthroughs with equal intensity, and somewhere in this strange ecosystem, certain shortcuts appear. Let's pause here for a moment. The 1880s, particularly in high-pressure industries, had a reputation for experimentation with stimulants. Wall Street had it, Hollywood had it, and yes, occasionally Silicon Valley had it too. Not everywhere, not everyone, but enough that the stories circulate quietly through the hallways of late-night coding sessions. It's rarely glamorous. There are no dramatic movie montages, no neon-lit parties filled with music and excess. Most of the time, it's just a tired group of engineers trying to stay awake long enough to finish something that seems impossible. Someone disappears into the bathroom. Someone returns a few minutes later with a sudden burst of confidence and a suspiciously enthusiastic explanation of how they're about to rewrite the entire networking module. For a while, it works. Energy spikes. Fingers fly across keyboards. Complex problems suddenly seem solvable. The mind races ahead of the code, chasing ideas faster than the computer can compile them. But like many shortcuts in life, and in programming, it comes with a cost. Because the brain is not actually designed to run at maximum speed for 20 straight hours. The excitement fades, the concentration wobbles, the bugs don't disappear, they multiply like digital gremlins. And eventually the same tired programmer who believed they were about to revolutionize computing finds themselves staring blankly at the screen again, wondering why the database just deleted half the test records. Meanwhile, the rest of the office continues its quieter rituals. Coffee still brews, pizza still arrives, someone still argues passionately about the correct indentation style for C code. Most programmers rely on these ordinary survival strategies instead of chemical experiments. Because truthfully, the real stimulant of Silicon Valley isn't cocaine, it's pressure. The pressure of building something new, the pressure of racing competitors, The pressure of knowing that your tiny team might be one clever idea away from changing the entire industry. That kind of pressure can make people behave in strange ways, but it can also produce incredible focus. The programmers who survive this environment aren't necessarily the ones who work the fastest or party the hardest. They're the ones who keep showing up, the ones who sit back down at their terminal after a crash and start typing again, because eventually the caffeine fades, the excitement fades, even the wild optimism of startup dreams fades a little. What remains is the work, quiet, stubborn work, lines of code written one after another in the middle of the night while the rest of the world sleeps. And in the long run, that persistence turns out to be far more powerful than any chemical shortcut. Which is fortunate, because computers are already difficult enough to reason with even when your brain is operating at perfectly normal human speed. Eventually someone suggests taking a break. This leads to a party that looks less like a glamorous tech gathering and more like a collection of exhausted engineers debating operating systems while eating cold pizza. Music plays. Someone explains the future of personal computing with the intensity of a prophet. Now, when most people imagine parties in the tech industry, they picture sleek events with flashing lights, champagne, and people wearing outfits that cost more than a used car. But Silicon Valley in the 1880s has a slightly different interpretation of the word party. First of all, the location. These gatherings rarely happen in glamorous clubs or rooftop bars. More often they take place in someone's living room, a cramped apartment near the office, or occasionally right there in the workplace after everyone collectively decides that leaving the building would require too much energy. Someone pushes a few desks aside. Someone else brings a cassette player. And suddenly, just like that, the office becomes a social event. Let's talk about the food. Technically, there is food. But food might be an ambitious term. Usually it's whatever survived the previous day's all-nighter. Half a pizza, a bag of chips, maybe a suspicious bowl of pretzels that has been sitting on the table long enough to develop a personality. Nobody complains. Programmers have a surprisingly high tolerance for questionable cuisine, especially when their last proper meal occurred sometime around Tuesday. Then the music starts. The soundtrack is pure 1880s, synth-heavy pop, classic rock, maybe a little new wave depending on who brought the tapes. The volume stays fairly low, partly out of respect for neighbours and partly because half the room is still mentally debugging code. Instead of dancing, most people cluster into small conversational groups, and this is where the real entertainment begins, because when programmers relax, they don't exactly stop thinking about technology. In fact, the opposite happens. The moment someone brings up an idea, any idea, the entire room becomes an impromptu symposium on the future of computing. One person insists that personal computers will soon appear in every home. Another argues that networking computers together will change everything. Someone in the corner confidently predicts that someday people will carry tiny computers in their pockets, capable of communicating instantly across the world. At this point, everyone politely nods while secretly thinking, "Sure, Dave. And maybe someday refrigerators will check our email too." Let's pause here for a moment. Have you ever been in a conversation where someone is so passionately excited about a topic that it becomes oddly contagious? That's what these parties feel like. Even the quiet programmers begin sharing ideas. They lean against the wall, sipping soda or cheap beer, explaining some new concept they've been experimenting with. A faster compiler, a better operating system, a strange little networking tool that might allow computers in different buildings to talk to each other. The discussions can get intense. Voices rise, not in anger, but in enthusiasm. Someone grabs a marker and starts drawing diagrams on the nearest whiteboard. Suddenly, the party is transformed into a midnight brainstorming session with pizza crumbs scattered across the technical documentation. And yet, despite all the seriousness, there's also laughter. Lots of it. Because these engineers may spend most of their days battling stubborn machines, but they also share a unique sense of humour. Jokes about buggy software circulate like inside secrets. Someone tells the story of a program that crashed because a single semicolon went missing. Another describes a debugging session that lasted 12 hours and ended with the discovery that the computer itself had simply been unplugged. Everyone laughs harder than the joke deserves. Exhaustion does that. As the night grows later, the party becomes quieter. Some people drift home. Others stretch out on couches or office chairs, too tired to move. The cassette player clicks as the tape reaches its end and begins rewinding with a soft mechanical whir. Outside, the valley is calm. Inside, the last few programmers are still talking softly about ideas that sound half impossible and half brilliant. They don't realise it yet, but many of the technologies shaping the modern world are being imagined right here, in rooms filled with cold pizza, cheap speakers, and tired engineers who just needed a short break from coding. Because in Silicon Valley, even the parties are really just brainstorming sessions, and the future apparently never sleeps. Occasionally mysterious visitors arrive wearing suits. These are venture capitalists, the strange financial creatures who fund the entire Silicon Valley ecosystem. They listen carefully while founders explain why their software will change the world. Sometimes they nod politely, sometimes they hand over millions of dollars. Nobody fully understands why. To truly appreciate this moment, you have to imagine the contrast. Most days, your office is filled with programmers in jeans and wrinkled t-shirts who look like they've been living inside a debugging session for several weeks. The furniture is mismatched. The whiteboards are covered in frantic diagrams. There's a faint smell of pizza crust and overheated electronics. And then one morning the suits arrive. You can spot them immediately. They walk differently, calmly, confidently, as if they belong in a completely different ecosystem, one where people sleep 8 hours and own more than one pair of shoes. They carry briefcases, actual briefcases. Let's pause for a moment. In Silicon Valley during the 1880s, venture capitalists were becoming a powerful force behind the technology boom. These investors specialized in funding risky new companies, startups that might fail spectacularly or might grow into something enormous. Nobody knew which would happen. But that uncertainty was part of the excitement. Back in the office, the atmosphere changes the moment the visitors step through the door. Suddenly everyone is slightly more awake. Someone hides the empty pizza boxes. Someone wipes a mysterious coffee stain off the conference table. The CEO starts speaking in a voice that suggests he has rehearsed this moment approximately 57 times in the mirror. You take a seat in the conference room. The presentation begins. Your founder walks through the slides, or more accurately, through a series of overhead transparencies and whiteboard sketches explaining the company's grand vision. They talk about the problem you're solving, the market opportunity, the revolutionary nature of the software your team is building. They say phrases like scalable architecture and future-proof infrastructure with tremendous confidence. Meanwhile, the venture capitalists listen. They nod occasionally. They ask questions that sound deceptively simple, but somehow feel terrifying. Questions like, so how does this make money? Or the even scarier one, why hasn't someone else already done this? You sit quietly while the technical explanation begins. The founder gestures toward the whiteboard. Boxes and arrows appear, describing how the system works. You recognize most of it. Some of it looks suspiciously improvised. But the suits remain calm. This is their profession, evaluating risk. They've seen hundreds of startups. Most fail, some survive. A few become wildly successful and return the investment many times over. That's the bet. Let's pause again. Have you ever watched someone place a large bet at a poker table and wondered how they can possibly be so confident? That's venture capital. They're not betting on the current product. They're betting on the people in the room, the founders, the engineers. The strange mix of intelligence, obsession, and optimism required to build something new. Back in the conference room, the conversation becomes more relaxed. The investors lean back in their chairs. They ask about your timeline, your competitors, your hiring plans. Someone refills the coffee. Then, sometimes, just sometimes, the magic words appear. We're interested. The room goes quiet. Because those two words can change everything. If the deal happens, the company suddenly has fuel. New computers, more engineers, maybe even a proper office that doesn't share a wall with a carpet cleaning business. But if the investors walk away, well, the team returns to their desks and keeps coding anyway. Because in Silicon Valley, venture capitalists may provide the money, but the real engine of the ecosystem is still the programmers sitting quietly at their terminals, writing code, fixing bugs, building something that might or might not become the next big thing, and the venture capitalists. They simply stand back, place their bets, and hope they've chosen the right room full of tired engineers to believe in, which, if you think about it, is a pretty extraordinary form of magic. Around 3 a.m., programmers develop a fascinating survival strategy. Sleeping at work, not in beds of course, in chairs, under desks, occasionally on the floor next to computer equipment humming like a mechanical lullaby. By this point in the night, the office has entered a strange, quiet phase. The early bursts of late-night productivity have faded. The pizza boxes are empty. The coffee pot has been refilled so many times that the coffee now tastes vaguely philosophical. And the programmers? They're running out of battery. You feel it first in your eyes. They begin to sting slightly every time you blink. Then your shoulders start to sag. The code on the screen slowly transforms into a series of symbols that feel less like a programming language and more like a secret message written by aliens. This is the moment when the human body politely reminds you that it was designed for sleep. But deadlines, as you may have noticed, do not care about the human body. So programmers improvise. Let's talk about the classic desk chair nap. This is the most common method. You lean back in your rolling chair, tilt your head at an angle that chiropractors would describe as ambitious, and close your eyes for what you promise will be just 5 minutes. 5 minutes becomes 20. Your co-workers step carefully around you, like archaeologists navigating a fragile artifact. Someone drapes a jacket over your shoulders. Someone else quietly turns down the music. In the dim office light, the entire room begins to resemble a strange sleepover for very tired adults. Then there's the under-desk strategy. This one requires a bit more commitment. You slide out of your chair, crawl beneath your desk, and curl up beside a tower of computer hardware that hums softly like a mechanical campfire. It's not comfortable exactly, but at 3 a.m, comfort is less important than horizontal positioning. Some programmers even bring improvised equipment. A folded hoodie becomes a pillow. A stack of manuals becomes a mattress. A rolled-up network cable becomes something that technically counts as lumbar support if you don't think about it too hard. Let's pause for a moment. Have you ever fallen asleep somewhere you absolutely weren't supposed to sleep? On a couch at a friend's house? On a long flight? In the back seat of a car during a road trip? Multiply that feeling by several all-nighters and you'll understand the office nap. The remarkable thing is how quickly it works. Even 10 minutes of sleep can reset a programmer's brain just enough to continue the battle with stubborn code. The human mind, it turns out, is surprisingly adaptable when survival is involved. Meanwhile, the computers continue humming patiently. The terminals glow softly in the darkened office. Disk drives click occasionally. Somewhere, a printer coughs out a final page before falling silent again. It's almost peaceful, like the entire building has decided to take a collective breath. Of course, these naps are rarely graceful. Someone snores softly beneath their desk. Another programmer wakes up suddenly, convinced they just solved a bug in their dreams. Someone else sleep talks about memory allocation, which is unsettling for everyone nearby. Eventually the short rest ends. One by one, programmers wake up. They stretch stiff arms, rub their eyes, and stare groggily at the screens waiting for them. The nap didn't fully recharge them, but it helped just enough. You sit back down at your terminal, the code is still there, the bug is still there, the deadline is definitely still there. But now your brain is slightly clearer. And in Silicon Valley during the 1880s, that tiny burst of refreshed energy can be the difference between giving up and writing the line of code that finally makes everything work. So the keyboards start clicking again, the computers hum approvingly, and the strange little ritual of the office nap fades into memory until the next all-nighter arrives and the entire cycle begins again. Morning arrives whether you like it or not. The sun rises over Silicon Valley while you stare at your monitor with bloodshot eyes. Your code finally works. You feel like a genius until someone else finds another bug. But let's slow down for a moment and appreciate the strange beauty of this hour. It's just after dawn. The office windows glow faintly with that soft California sunlight that feels almost suspiciously cheerful compared to the night you've just survived. Outside, commuters are beginning their day like normal humans. Cars roll into parking lots. Someone across the street is watering a patch of grass that looks far more rested than you do. Inside the office, however, time feels warped. Your brain is moving slowly now, like an old computer trying to boot up after a power outage. The caffeine has worn off. Your spine feels like it has been folded into an origami crane, and your eyes have begun negotiating with gravity. Let's talk about the bloodshot stare. After a full night of debugging, your eyes develop a special look. They're red, slightly glazed, and permanently locked onto the glowing terminal in front of you. You blink slowly, like someone emerging from a deep philosophical meditation about semicolons and memory allocation. And yet, somehow, your program works. The code finally runs without crashing. The output appears exactly where it should. No errors, no mysterious warnings, just clean, obedient functionality. For a moment, you sit back in your chair, you stretch your arms, you feel brilliant. Not just smart, brilliant, like you've climbed a technological mountain while the rest of the world slept. You imagine explaining this victory to someone who doesn't code. They would never understand the emotional rollercoaster of chasing a bug through 5 different files, only to discover it was caused by a single misplaced character. But you understand, and so does the team. Because around the office, other programmers are having similar moments. Someone raises a quiet fist in celebration. Someone else whispers, "Yes," with the emotional restraint of a scientist discovering a new element. The atmosphere is strange, exhausted but triumphant. Let's pause here. Have you ever stayed awake all night working on something difficult and then watched the sunrise knowing you finally solved it? There's a unique kind of satisfaction in that moment, but in Silicon Valley that satisfaction rarely lasts long. Because just as you lean back, basking in the glow of victory, a coworker rolls their chair over. They stare at your screen, they tilt their heads slightly, and then they say the most dangerous sentence in the programming language. "Hey, that's cool, but what happens if the input is negative?" Your heart sinks, you run the program again, and sure enough, something breaks. The output becomes strange. The numbers look wrong. The system behaves in ways that suggest the computer has quietly lost confidence in your abilities. Another bug. Of course, because software development isn't a straight path from problem to solution. It's more like a maze where every exit reveals 3 new corridors labelled unexpected behaviour. So you sigh. Not a dramatic sigh. Just a quiet one, the kind that comes from experience. You lean forward again, crack your knuckles, and begin scanning through the code. Around you, the office is waking up. The programmers who went home last night are arriving with fresh coffee and suspiciously energetic attitudes. They glance at the exhausted night crew with a mix of admiration and concern. Someone asks how things went. You answer simply, progress. And that's the truth. Because even with the new bug, even with the exhaustion, something important happened during the night. The software moved forward. The system improved. The team learned something new about the strange digital universe they're building together. Outside, the valley is fully awake now. The sunlight fills the office. The coffee pot begins brewing again. The next workday quietly begins, and you, slightly delirious but strangely proud, prepare to dive back into the code. Because in Silicon Valley, the morning after an all-nighter isn't the end of the story. It's just the beginning of the next debugging session. Meanwhile, the tech industry itself is locked in a silent war. Different companies are racing to control the future of personal computing. Operating systems battle for dominance. Hardware companies compete fiercely. Nobody knows who will win, but everyone knows the stakes are enormous. From your desk, this war doesn't look like tanks and marching armies. It looks like whiteboards full of system diagrams, stacks of floppy disks, and programmers arguing passionately about memory management while holding cold slices of pizza. But make no mistake, this is a battlefield. Let's talk about operating systems for a moment. An operating system is the quiet middleman between you and the machine. It decides how programs run, how files are stored, how memory is used, and whether your computer behaves like a helpful assistant or a mildly irritated brick. In the 1880s, this layer of software is still being invented. Different companies have different visions of how computers should work. Some believe machines should be simple tools that anyone can use. Others believe computers should remain powerful but complicated instruments for engineers and specialists. And somewhere in between, a dozen competing operating systems are fighting for survival. At the office, you hear these debates constantly. One programmer swears that Unix is the future because it's elegant, modular, and powerful. Another insists that personal computers need something simpler if they're ever going to reach ordinary people. A third person argues that the real winner will be whichever system convinces software developers to build on top of it. The discussions get intense. Not angry exactly, but passionate in the way that only sleep-deprived engineers can be. Someone draws a diagram explaining kernel architecture. Someone else interrupts to explain why that design will collapse under heavy load. Let's pause here. Have you ever watched a group of experts argue about something so technical that the conversation starts sounding like a foreign language? That's the operating system debate. Words like process scheduling, file systems, and virtual memory fly through the room while you nod thoughtfully, pretending you completely understand everything. But beneath the technical jargon lies a simple truth. Whoever wins the operating system war controls the platform, and whoever controls the platform controls the future of computing. Because software developers will build programs for the most popular system. Hardware manufacturers will design machines that support it. Businesses will adopt whatever tools make their work easier. The winner becomes the foundation. The loser becomes a historical footnote. Back in the office, this reality adds a quiet intensity to your work. You're not just writing code for a product. You're writing code for a possible future. The software your team builds might end up running on millions of machines. Or it might disappear entirely if a competing system becomes dominant. It's a strange feeling. On one hand, you're just sitting in a small office typing commands into a terminal. On the other hand, you're participating in an industry-wide race that could shape how the world interacts with technology for decades. Outside your building, other teams are doing the same thing. Across the valley, engineers at different companies are refining their own operating systems. Some focus on speed, others on reliability, others on usability for ordinary people who don't know what a command line is. The competition is fierce. Sometimes the debates spill into conferences, technical journals, or late-night arguments at tech meetups. Engineers defend their preferred systems like loyal sports fans defending their team. And yet, for all the rivalry, there's also a shared sense of excitement. Because everyone involved understands that this moment in history is special. Personal computers are spreading rapidly. Businesses are adopting them. Universities are teaching programming to a new generation of students. The world is beginning to realize that these strange beige machines might become essential tools for everyday life, and the operating system is the brain that makes it all possible. Back at your terminal, you type another line of code. You're not thinking about global tech wars in that moment. You're just trying to make your program behave properly. But somewhere in the back of your mind, there's a quiet awareness that this little piece of software might someday run on a machine that didn't even exist when you started writing it, which is both thrilling and terrifying. Because in the middle of the operating system wars, every programmer is doing the same thing, typing, compiling, debugging, and quietly hoping their side of the battle is the one that history remembers. Every era has a soundtrack. In this one, it's the steady rhythm of keyboards, floppy disk drives clicking, and printers screaming like mechanical banshees while producing endless sheets of paper. It's not music in the traditional sense. There are no melodies, no harmonies, no catchy hooks. But to a programmer in the 1880s, these sounds form the background noise of creation, the audio landscape in which entire digital worlds are quietly being built. Let's start with the keyboards. Modern keyboards are soft, quiet, and satisfyingly subtle. The keyboards of the 1880s? Absolutely not. These things sound like miniature typewriters fueled by spite. Every key press is a sharp clack, followed by a slightly louder CLSEK when someone is particularly frustrated. The sound echoes across the room, turning the office into a kind of percussive symphony where every programmer plays their part. The speed of the typing reveals the emotional state of the typist. Rapid-fire typing means inspiration. Slow, heavy keystrokes mean despair. A long pause followed by a single stressed clack means a bug just won another battle. And the floppy disk drives, those melodic little creatures, add their own rhythm. You slide a disk into the slot. The machine inhales it with a mechanical gulp. Then comes the spinning, the soft, scratchy whir, the unmistakable ka-chunk of a drive head, moving across magnetic surfaces like a tiny librarian, searching for the right page in a very confused book. It's a sound that represents hope. Because when the drive starts working, it means your program might actually load, or save, or compile, or behave. You never really know. That's part of the charm. Let's pause here for a moment. Have you ever listened to an old piece of technology and realized it has a personality? That's every floppy drive in Silicon Valley. Some sound enthusiastic, some sound tired, some make noises that suggest they are considering retirement. And then there are the printers. Oh yes, dot matrix printers. If you've never heard one, imagine a steel woodpecker with unresolved emotional issues attacking a sheet of paper with all its might. The machine screeches, rattles, and slams its printhead back and forth with the fury of someone trying to escape a terrible contract. But programmers use them constantly. Need documentation? Print it. Need a bug report? Print it. Need a large ASCII picture of a duck someone drew for fun during a meeting? Print it immediately. The paper emerges with long perforated edges that must be peeled off, usually by an intern or whoever drew the shortest metaphorical straw. Between the typewriter clacks, the drive clicks, and the printer shrieks, the office becomes a strange mechanical orchestra. But the soundtrack doesn't stop there. Occasionally, someone's portable cassette player adds music to the mix. Soft rock, synthwave, early electronic tracks, songs that sink quietly into the background behind the deeper, more industrial noises of the machines. The music isn't there for entertainment. It's more like emotional cushioning for the brain. And then there are the human sounds. The sighs, the groans, the muttered curses at code that refuses to behave, the triumphant shouts when something finally compiles, the quiet laughter when someone finds an especially ridiculous workaround. These are the vocals layered on top of the mechanical soundtrack. Sometimes you hear a conversation in the background. Did you save the previous version? No. Oh God. Ka-chunk were scream. Even the office chairs contribute sound effects, creaking under the weight of tired programmers as they lean back, stretch, and contemplate abandoning technology forever in favour of goat farming. The HVAC hums overhead. The fluorescent lights buzz softly. The coffee machine burbles when someone desperately attempts to brew another pot. It's chaos. It's noisy. It's strangely comforting. Because these sounds mean the office is alive. The machines are awake. The programmers are awake-ish. Ideas are being translated into code, one loud keystroke at a time. Decades later, when the world becomes filled with silent laptops and whisper-quiet printers, programmers will look back on this era with a strange mix of nostalgia and relief. They'll remember the soundtrack, this mechanical, clattering, buzzing symphony, as the background noise of invention. A soundtrack that shaped an industry, a soundtrack that built the future, a soundtrack that, despite everything, helped tired humans and stubborn machines create something extraordinary together. Lunch in Silicon Valley isn't glamorous. It's usually fast food, vending machine snacks, or pizza delivered at suspicious hours. Nutrition is not a priority. Survival is. Let's paint the picture. It's noon, technically lunchtime, but nobody in the office seems entirely convinced that time is real anymore. Programmers look up from their screens with the same expression small animals make when emerging from burrows. Confused, blinking, and slightly disoriented. Someone announces, "We should get food," in the tone of a person rediscovering a forgotten biological requirement. And thus begins the hunt. There is a cafeteria, but calling it a cafeteria is generous. It's more of a beige-tiled room attached to a microwave that has seen things. The refrigerator contains 2 expired yogurts, half a sandwich from a previous fiscal quarter, and a bottle of mustard whose origin is best left a mystery. No one dares clean it out because everyone silently hopes management will eventually notice and replace the whole thing. Instead, programmers turn to their trusted allies, the vending machines. Ah, yes, the vending machines. These humming metal boxes represent the beating heart of Silicon Valley cuisine. Inside them, chips, candy, stale crackers, dried out pastries, and something that looks like a granola bar but probably qualifies as industrial sealant in certain states. Desperation leads to experimentation. You quickly discover that if you press B7 twice in a row and shake the machine gently, you can sometimes get 2 snacks for the price of 1. Next door to the vending machine is the microwave, an ancient device that emits a low electrical buzz every time someone tries to reheat leftovers. The programmers gather around it like medieval villagers huddling around a fire. Today's offerings include spaghetti in a plastic container, unidentifiable rice dishes, and pizza slices that have achieved a geological level of hardness. The microwave dings. A cheer goes up. Lunch is served. Let's pause here for a moment. Have you ever reheated something in a microwave and felt like you were performing a dark ritual? That's daily life in the cafeteria. Sometimes, though, someone suggests leaving the building. This is an ambitious idea that requires the team to stand, walk, and interact with sunlight. Most reject it immediately. But occasionally, a group ventures out and heads to a fast food restaurant down the street, usually a burger place, occasionally a burrito stand, seldom anything involving vegetables. The drive back is quiet. People chew slowly, their brains too exhausted to generate conversation. Someone accidentally spills fries on a diagram of the system architecture, and instead of cleaning it up, the team simply eats around it. Back at the office, the truly unhinged lunch option appears, the delivery pizza. It arrives in a cardboard box that is somehow already greasy before anyone touches it. The slices inside are uneven, misshapen, and absurdly hot in the centre, while being mysteriously cold on the edges. Nobody complains. They simply grab slices, fold them in half like edible envelopes, and continue typing while eating. The office floor ends up covered in crumbs. A programmer leans back in their chair and mutters, "This counts as a vegetable, right?" while holding a slice with exactly one wilted pepperoni and a suspiciously orange smear of tomato sauce. Let's talk beverages. Water. Not unless absolutely necessary. Most programmers subsist on soda. Cans of cola, root beer, and diet drinks stack up around desks like tiny aluminum monuments to questionable lifestyle choices. On especially stressful days, someone brings in a 2-litre bottle and drinks straight from it while debugging. There's also coffee. Endless coffee. Coffee at noon. Coffee at 3 p.m. Coffee at 9 p.m. Coffee at 1 a.m. It's less of a beverage and more of a coping strategy. And yet, in the middle of all this questionable cuisine, something remarkable happens. The programmers eat together. They sit on desks, lean against walls, gather around whiteboards and talk about code, about competitors, about impossible ideas that seem borderline magical after the third slice of pizza. Food isn't a break. Food is a continuation of the work. It's fuel for conversation, creativity, and the peculiar type of delirious optimism that only appears when your entire lunch consists of snacks purchased from a machine that occasionally eats quarters and refuses refunds. By the time lunch ends, no one feels particularly healthy, but everyone feels slightly more human. They wipe their hands on their jeans, take a deep breath, and return to their terminals, ready to build the future on a diet that would horrify any physician. Because in 1880s Silicon Valley, you don't eat for pleasure. You eat to stay alive long enough to finish your code. Popular culture likes to imagine brilliant inventors working alone. In reality, Silicon Valley breakthroughs come from chaotic teams arguing loudly in small conference rooms filled with whiteboards. It's a romantic image, isn't it? One solitary genius hunched over a keyboard at 3 a.m., illuminated only by the glow of a monitor, typing out the future line by line. Movies love this. Books love this. Even some founders love to retell their own stories with dramatic flair, conveniently forgetting everyone else who was in the room. But inside an actual 1880s Silicon Valley startup, the truth is far more crowded. Let's begin with the conference room. This is the arena where ideas live or die. It's a cramped space with mismatched chairs, a scarred wooden table, and a whiteboard that has been wiped so many times it now carries pale ghost marks of previous diagrams. There are markers everywhere, some uncapped, some dried out, all of them questionable. The moment a meeting starts, chaos erupts. One engineer grabs a marker and begins sketching an architecture diagram that looks vaguely like a subway map designed by someone who hasn't slept in 2 days. Another interrupts immediately. No, the bottleneck is here, circling something aggressively. A third person chimes in with a suggestion that contradicts both previous arguments, and suddenly the conversation enters a 3-way collision of opinions. This isn't dysfunction. This is collaboration. Silicon Valley style. Let's pause here. Have you ever tried cooking with several strong-willed chefs in one kitchen? That's what designing software is like here. Everyone has an idea. Everyone believes their idea is correct. Everyone is partially right and partially wrong. The magic comes from the collision. There is no lone genius standing separate from the team. There is instead a collective brain, messy, argumentative, exhausted, brilliant. Ideas bounce between people until they sharpen. Someone proposes a feature. Someone else explains why it's impossible. Another explains a workaround. Another draws a diagram showing how it could integrate with the existing system. By the end, nobody remembers whose idea it was originally, but the solution exists, and that's what matters. Meanwhile, the myth of the lone genius persists outside these walls, mostly because it feels cleaner, simple, inspirational. But real innovation, it's nothing like that. Innovation is the sound of 5 people shouting at once. It's a debate that lasts 3 hours and ends only because someone remembers the vending machine is still stocked. It's a marketing guy poking his head in to ask, "So how close are we?" And everyone responding in unison, "Not now, Brad." It's the CEO pacing the room, alternating between wild optimism, "This will change everything," and mild panic. Why isn't the prototype working yet? Even the quiet programmers contribute, usually in moments where nobody expects it. They lean back, rub their eyes, and calmly point out the exact bug that has been causing the entire team grief for 12 straight hours. And suddenly, everything makes sense. But teamwork in the Valley isn't just intellectual collaboration, it's emotional endurance training. Because the meetings don't stop at technical disagreements. There are arguments about deadlines, design decisions, user experience, what to prioritize, and whether the entire project should be rewritten from scratch because someone discovered a more elegant approach. It gets loud, it gets heated. Occasionally someone storms out, only to return 5 minutes later with a fresh cup of coffee and a slightly sheepish expression. Yet despite the chaos, something extraordinary happens. Progress. Not one person's progress. Everyone's progress. The breakthrough isn't born from isolation. It's forged in friction. The best ideas emerge when they are challenged, defended, reshaped and rebuilt by a dozen different brains working in imperfect but determined harmony. And when the final product launches, when the software finally works, when the world begins using something your team created, people outside the office ask, "Who invented this?" And the answer, despite what the PR department prints, is never simple. It wasn't one genius. It wasn't one night of brilliance. It wasn't a single spark of inspiration. It was a group of very tired, very opinionated, slightly chaotic humans sitting in a small conference room, arguing their way toward the future. Because in real Silicon Valley history, the lone genius is a myth. But the team of geniuses, loud, flawed, stubborn, brilliant, that's real. And it's far more impressive. Eventually the deadline arrives. The product must ship. Bugs remain. Panic spreads. Programmers scramble to fix everything before customers notice the software occasionally explodes. Shipping software in 1880s Silicon Valley is not a calm process. It's not organized. It's not graceful. It is, in fact, the closest a technology company ever gets to participating in an extreme sport. The moment someone says, "All right, we're shipping on Friday," the office transforms instantly from a mildly chaotic workspace into a pressure cooker with fluorescent lighting. First comes denial. "We still have time," someone says confidently, despite the fact that the clock on the wall is counting down like a doomsday device in a sci-fi movie. People nod. No one believes it. Bugs are still appearing in the code like unwanted guests. Every fix seems to break 3 other things. You begin to suspect the software itself is actively resisting you. Then comes bargaining. If we just patch the memory leak, we can ignore the UI freeze issue, right? What if we remove this feature and call it a future enhancement? Does the program really need to run on every machine? Teams gather around whiteboards with the desperation of survivors planning an escape route. Features get trimmed. Functions get rewritten at terrifying speed. Entire modules vanish overnight because someone realized they were unnecessary, inefficient, or completely impossible to complete by the deadline. Then comes the caffeine. Coffee pots bubble, soda cans pop. Someone brings in an entire box of donuts, and within 10 minutes they're devoured by stressed engineers who forgot food was a thing humans needed. The office hums louder now, not because of the computers, but because half the programming staff is vibrating from sugar and adrenaline. Let's pause here for a moment. Have you ever tried cleaning your house really fast because someone said they were 5 minutes away, even though your house is absolutely not ready? Software shipping is like that, except instead of dirty laundry, you have logic errors. Instead of a cluttered counter, you have failing compile tests. And instead of your mum showing up early, it's your investors. Around mid-afternoon on the last day, something interesting happens. The stress peaks. You can tell because someone starts laughing for no reason. Someone else is staring blankly at a wall, whispering variable names to themselves. A third person insists loudly that the software is haunted. Nobody disagrees. Technical discussions evolve into frantic triage sessions. The remaining bugs get sorted into categories like must fix, should fix, definitely won't fix, and pretend this never existed. Meanwhile, the build process becomes its own form of torment. Creating a final version of the software requires compiling everything at once, packaging files onto multiple floppy disks, and praying the entire system doesn't have a meltdown in the final stages. One mistake, one missing file, one corrupted disk, one rogue semicolon, and the whole effort collapses, forcing the team to start again, and the clock keeps ticking. As the deadline approaches, the tension becomes almost physical. Even the air feels nervous. You run tests. You run more tests. You fix tiny issues with trembling hands, hoping each modification doesn't unleash new horrors. Everyone is operating at 40% of their usual stress capacity, except the one programmer who seems disturbingly calm and keeps saying, "It'll be fine," which somehow makes everyone feel worse. Finally, the moment arrives. The build succeeds. The disks are labelled. The package is ready. Someone cheers weakly. Someone else collapses into a chair. A few people half-jokingly consider retiring and moving to a quiet farm where computers cannot follow them. But the process isn't done, because now comes the final stage, the existential dread. You sit there staring at the neatly labelled stack of disks, knowing the software is out of your hands. Customers will install it. They will try things you never anticipated. They will click buttons you never intended anyone to click. They will break it in ways you didn't know were possible, and you wait. Wait for feedback. Wait for bug reports. Wait for the inevitable phone call that begins with, "So something weird happened." Because shipping software isn't a finish line. It's the beginning of a new chapter where the world tests your creation, and you discover that every program, no matter how carefully built, has opinions of its own. And in Silicon Valley, surviving that moment is a victory all by itself. Despite the chaos, something extraordinary is happening. Inside these cluttered offices, engineers are quietly building the tools that will define modern life. Personal computers, networking systems, and software that will eventually connect the world. It doesn't look glamorous. In fact, it looks the opposite of glamorous. You're surrounded by dusty terminals, tangled cords, whiteboards covered in diagrams that resemble conspiracy theories, and exhausted programmers who appear to be held together by caffeine and wishful thinking. Yet beneath all this clutter, something profound is taking shape. This is the quiet part of innovation, the part nobody celebrates in movies. The room hums softly, keyboards clatter. A floppy disk drive clicks rhythmically like it's trying to keep time with the heartbeat of the future. Someone coughs. Someone else mutters happily because a function finally returned the correct value. The present moment feels small, but the work the work is enormous. Let's pause here for a moment. Have you ever looked at something ordinary, your phone, your laptop, a web page, and realised it's built on decades of invisible effort? This is where that effort happens, not in glossy boardrooms, not in glamorous labs, but in these cluttered, cramped offices where engineers spend long nights arguing over file systems, packet routing, memory management, and whether semicolons truly deserve that much power over human emotions. Piece by piece, the digital world is being assembled. Take personal computers, for example. To the outside observer of the 1880s, a home computer is a novelty, something used for word processing, primitive games, or hobbyist tinkering. But inside Silicon Valley offices, the vision is different. Engineers imagine machines in every home, connected, powerful, intuitive. Machines that could help people learn, create, communicate, and express themselves in ways society had never seen before. Meanwhile, networking pioneers are working late into the night, trying to solve problems that seem bizarrely theoretical at the time. How do you send information across a wire and make sure it arrives in the right place? What if computers could talk to other computers? What if entire networks could talk to each other? These questions sound obvious now. They were radical then. Across the room, software teams are building the foundations of applications modern users take for granted. Word processors, spreadsheets, graphical interfaces that can turn libraries of information into something usable, friendly, and intuitive. Every breakthrough begins as a messy idea scrawled on a whiteboard beside a half-eaten slice of pizza. And while the industry outside is engaged in loud battles, operating system wars, hardware showdowns, marketing fights, inside the office, the work is quiet and meticulous. A programmer leans forward, squinting at their screen. Another adjusts the brightness knob on a monitor because nobody wants to admit how bad the glare is. Someone scribbles pseudocode on a napkin, then triumphantly shouts, "I think I found a way around the memory limit." Small victories, small breakthroughs, small steps that will one day lead to giant leaps. No one in the room fully understands the scale of what they're building. They suspect it's important, yes. They feel the pressure of competition, yes. But the true reach of their work, the billions of lives it will touch, the industries it will reshape, the global culture it will rewrite, remains hidden beyond the horizon. It's like standing at the foot of a mountain and only later realizing you were carving the trail that future generations would climb effortlessly. And the irony. The people doing this work don't feel brilliant. They feel tired. They feel behind schedule. They feel overwhelmed by hardware limitations, buggy compilers, and mysterious crashes that seem personally motivated. Yet every day they move forward. Every late-night breakthrough, every stubborn bug fixed, every scribbled diagram that becomes code that becomes a feature, they're constructing the scaffolding of the digital age quietly, imperfectly, relentlessly. And one day, decades later, people will look back at this time and say, that's when it started, that's when everything began. But for now, it's just another long day in a cluttered office. Just another tired engineer writing another line of code. Just another quiet moment in the birthplace of the future. Months of long nights take their toll. Even the most enthusiastic programmer eventually reaches a strange mental state where simple problems feel impossible and coffee stops working. Burnout doesn't arrive dramatically. It doesn't burst through the office doors wearing a trench coat and sunglasses. It sneaks in quietly, like a rogue bug hiding in the deepest part of your codebase. One day you're energetic, focused, solving complex problems with ease. The next day, you find yourself staring blankly at your terminal, unable to remember why you opened the file you're looking at. Let's talk about the early signs. At first, the symptoms seem harmless. You start mixing up variable names. You spend 20 minutes debugging a function, only to discover it wasn't the function that was broken, it was you. You catch yourself reading the same line of code 5 times without absorbing a single character. You begin to suspect you're living inside an infinite loop. Then the fatigue settles in. Not the normal kind. Not, I stayed up too late watching TV tired. This is a deeper exhaustion, a kind that lodges itself right behind your eyes. You feel it when you try to think, when you try to type, when you attempt to process anything more complicated than a print statement. The brain, once a powerful instrument, begins operating at the speed of a floppy disk stuck in permanent red mode. Your co-workers notice. Not because you tell them, but because burnout has a distinctive look. The frayed patience, the 1,000-yard stare, the way you sip coffee like it's a life-saving potion, even though it lost all effectiveness 2 days ago. Someone asks if you're okay. You answer with the classic programmer lie, yeah, just tired. But you're not just tired. You're running low on every internal resource you have. Creativity, motivation, mental endurance, emotional bandwidth. Let's pause here. Have you ever tried to run an app on your computer when you have 15 other programs already open and everything starts moving in slow motion? That's your brain on burnout. Now the tricky part is that Silicon Valley in the 1880s doesn't exactly encourage rest. The culture practically worships overwork. The legend of the tireless coder, the myth that brilliance blooms at 3 a.m. after 12 consecutive hours of debugging, permeates every corner of the industry. So instead of taking a break, you push harder, you drink more coffee, you stay later, you take on tasks you shouldn't. The result? Your internal compiler throws errors. Problems that used to feel manageable now feel insurmountable. A tiny bug that should take 10 minutes to fix consumes your entire afternoon. You scroll through your code searching for answers, but all you see is a streaming waterfall of characters that refuses to make sense no matter how long you look. Burnout also distorts time. Hours slip away without progress. Deadlines rush toward you at terrifying speed. You begin to feel trapped inside your own project, unable to move forward yet unable to step away. You watch the clock hit midnight, then 1 a.m., then 2 a.m., and wonder how everyone around you is still functioning. Then comes the emotional crash. Frustration sharpens. Patience evaporates. The smallest inconvenience, a missing semicolon, a crashing build, a co-worker breathing too loudly, suddenly feels catastrophic. You fantasize about deleting the entire codebase and starting fresh. You even briefly consider switching careers to something less stressful, like goat herding, light housekeeping, or professional napping. Meanwhile, the physical symptoms arrive. Your posture collapses, your shoulders hunch permanently toward the keyboard, your wrist ache, your head feels heavy. You move like a robot programmed for minimum efficiency. The terrifying part is that burnout convinces you this is normal. This is just the job, you tell yourself. Everyone feels this way. This is what it takes to succeed. But eventually, slowly, you hit a breaking point. Not dramatic, but unmistakable. You write a line of code, stare at it, and realize you can't remember how conditionals work, or loops, or your own name, briefly. And that's when you understand. Your brain has stopped compiling. You need rest. Real rest. Not a nap under your desk. Not a weekend spent worrying about Monday. Actual recovery. Naturally, because this is 1880s Silicon Valley, you probably take a 45-minute nap, drink another coffee, and keep working anyway. But one day, eventually, you'll step back and breathe. You'll remember what clarity feels like, and you'll return to your terminal refreshed, finally able to see the logical solution in front of you. Because even in the high-pressure world of early tech, a burned-out brain can always be rebuilt. But only if you remember that you're human, not a machine running infinite loops. Stories begin circulating about legendary programmers who wrote entire operating systems in a single weekend or debugged impossible errors through sheer stubbornness. These stories float around the office like folklore, whispered at 2 a.m. during an all-nighter shared over microwaved burritos, or retold dramatically by a senior engineer who absolutely swears they were there when it happened. They're the campfire tales of early computing, complete with improbable feats, questionable logic, and heroes who looked like very tired graduate students. Every company has at least one legend. Let's start with the weekend OS guy. According to the myth, he sat down with a stack of blank floppy disks, 3 cans of soda, and a fierce glare, and by Monday morning he had written a functioning operating system from scratch. Did he sleep? No. Did he eat? Unclear. Did anyone actually witness this? Also unclear. But the story persists because it captures the spirit of Silicon Valley, the belief that a single determined human, properly caffeinated, can accomplish the impossible. Then there's the stubborn debugger. This legend involves someone who spent 40 straight hours chasing a bug through a maze of spaghetti code. Everyone else gave up. The project manager called it unfixable. Even the computer seemed resigned to the error. But not this programmer. They glared at the screen until the program finally broke down emotionally and revealed the issue. A typo so small, so microscopic, that it may as well have been a cosmic joke. Supposedly, when they fixed it, the entire system ran perfectly. The stubborn debugger then stood up, stretched, and said, "I knew it." Then they immediately fell asleep on the floor. The stories get stranger from there. There's talk of a programmer who could type at the speed of sound, another who could look at a stack trace and immediately know which line of code contained the problem, a legendary engineer who could optimize any algorithm simply by squinting at it, and the mythical silicon whisperer who could fix hardware by lightly tapping the case and muttering something about electrons behaving themselves. Let's pause here for a moment. Have you ever noticed how every profession creates its own exaggerated heroes? Athletes have superhuman plays, chefs have impossible meals, teachers have stories of miracle students. Programmers? They have tales of coding miracles. Part of it is humour. Exaggeration helps get through stressful nights, but part of it is hope. Because when you're knee-deep in bugs, running on caffeine fumes and losing track of how many hours you've been awake, it's comforting to believe breakthroughs are possible, even the ridiculous ones. The legends often contain small grains of truth. Yes, someone did once fix a crashing system with 2 minutes to spare before a live demo. Yes, someone did rewrite a critical module in record speed because they misread the deadline and thought it was due 12 hours earlier. Yes, someone did debug a networking failure by realizing a cable had been plugged into the wrong port for 3 weeks. But the stories grow with every retelling. A simple patch becomes a heroic rewrite. A routine optimization becomes a genius-level breakthrough. A lucky guess becomes divine intuition. These myths bind programmers together. They provide a sense of identity, a shared culture rooted in the strange, unpredictable world of early tech. When you hear these stories, a small part of you thinks, maybe someday they'll tell a story about me. Maybe not the operating system in a weekend one. That's clearly nonsense. But maybe the story about the time you saved the company by catching a last-minute bug, or the time you invented a tool that made everyone's life easier, or the time you accidentally broke the build server but fixed it before anyone noticed, thus preventing full-scale mutiny. Because here's the real secret behind Silicon Valley legends. They aren't about bragging. They're about belonging. They remind everyone, rookie or veteran, genius or exhausted caffeine goblin, that they're part of something larger than themselves. A community built on creativity, perseverance, and a slightly unhinged willingness to face problems that look impossible. And maybe that's why the legends endure. Not because they're true, but because they inspire you to keep typing, keep trying, keep digging through your code even when your brain feels like a defragging hard drive. Because who knows? Maybe someday, after another long night and a breakthrough you barely believe yourself, someone else will say, "Have you heard the story of the programmer who pulled that off?" And just like that, a new legend is born. Of course, many companies fail, investors disappear, offices empty, brilliant ideas quietly vanish. It's one of Silicon Valley's most universal truths. For every success story immortalized in documentary and business books, dozens of startups crumble quietly into the digital dust. No grand finale, no dramatic explosion, just silence. One day the office is buzzing with frantic ambition, and the next day you can hear the fluorescent lights humming because there's nobody left to drown them out. Let's begin with the first sign of trouble. It usually starts subtly, too subtly for anyone to admit it's happening. A scheduled product release gets postponed. A meeting with investors ends faster than expected. The company fridge stops being restocked. The CEO begins speaking in vague inspirational phrases like, "We're pivoting," or "This is just a transitional phase," which everyone knows are code for, "We are holding this together with duct tape and positive thinking." Then comes the tightening. Budgets shrink. Travel is cancelled. Lunch stipends vanish mysteriously. Someone suggests switching from name-brand coffee to generic economy blend, and morale drops a full 17%. Engineers, who previously debated architecture decisions with the enthusiasm of medieval scholars, now discuss job listings with the quiet tone of people planning an escape route. Yet everyone keeps working, because hope is stubborn in Silicon Valley. People whisper, maybe the investors will return, maybe the new demo will impress the board, maybe that big client will sign the contract, maybe, just maybe, this company still has a future. Let's pause here for a moment. Have you ever watched a Jenga tower wobble, knowing it's about to fall, but still hoping someone has a miracle move left? That's a failing startup. And then one day, the miracle move doesn't happen. The email arrives, or the meeting is called, or the CEO appears with an expression that could politely be described as absolutely defeated. They explain that funding has dried up. The product isn't ready. The debt is too high. The investors are moving in a different direction, which usually means investing in a different company run by someone with better hair. Reality hits the office like a quiet earthquake. People stare at their screens. Someone nervously clicks their pen. Someone else looks at the floor. A programmer who spent 6 months building a feature nobody will ever use suddenly has a profound existential crisis. And then the packing begins. Cardboard boxes materialize seemingly from thin air. Desks are emptied. Personal mugs and quirky desk toys are tucked away like relics from a forgotten civilization. Whiteboards, once filled with diagrams of grand ambitions, are erased, leaving behind faint ghost marks of inventions that never were. There's a strange finality to it. The servers are shut down. The floppy disks are boxed up. The refrigerator is cleaned for the first time in years. Co-workers exchange awkward goodbyes, promising to stay in touch, even though everyone knows only half of them actually will. Some people cry, most just sigh. Because failure in Silicon Valley isn't dramatic. It's quiet, ordinary. The kind of quiet that hangs in the air after a long storm, tired, heavy, inevitable. But here's the thing, failure isn't the end here. In Silicon Valley, collapse is almost a rite of passage. Startups die, but the people don't stop. They move on. They carry the lessons, painful, expensive lessons, to the next job, the next idea, the next room full of whiteboards. A failed startup becomes a story told over lunch at the new job, a badge of experience, a scar that proves you were there, that you tried, that you built something even if it didn't survive. And sometimes, weeks or months later, one of your former co-workers sends a message. Hey, I'm joining a new team. They're doing something interesting. Want in? And you do. Because even after watching an entire dream collapse in slow motion, even after the stress, the exhaustion, the loss, you still carry that tiny spark of belief. The belief that the next startup might be the one that works. That spark is what built Silicon Valley, not the successes, not the money, but the simple, stubborn willingness to begin again after everything has fallen apart. But a few companies survive. A handful of programmers become wildly successful. Their weird little startup turns into something massive. These are the stories Silicon Valley loves to tell, the opposite of the collapse tale, the bright side of the tech coin. They're the myths whispered in cafeterias, the legends passed down to new hires, the dreams that keep exhausted programmers awake at 3 a.m., long after their brains have begged for mercy. But success, real success, never looks like people imagine. Let's start at the beginning. One day, almost without warning, something shifts inside the tiny office. Maybe it's a big client signing on. Maybe the long-awaited software demo works perfectly. Maybe the industry press writes an article declaring your team promising. Maybe the investors finally miraculously say yes. Suddenly there's money. Not yacht money, not private jet money, but enough to upgrade the office chairs so they no longer actively cause spinal trauma. Enough to hire more engineers, buy better hardware, or purchase a coffee machine that doesn't hiss like a dying dragon every time someone brews a pot. Momentum builds. The team works just as hard as before, sometimes harder, but the mood shifts. The laughter comes easier. The debugging sessions feel less like emergency surgery and more like problem solving with friends. People start believing that maybe, just maybe, all those late nights weren't for nothing. And then the growth hits. New employees arrive. The original team gives them tours, pointing proudly at whiteboards scribbled with diagrams only 3 people on Earth fully understand. More desks are crammed into the office. More chairs. More cables. More chaos. But it's a joyful chaos, the kind that smells like possibility. Let's pause here for a moment. Have you ever watched a small project you cared about suddenly take on a life of its own? It's exhilarating. It's terrifying. It's ridiculously addictive. Then the first major product launch arrives. The team gathers around the office radio, or a small TV or an early computer terminal, watching or listening for reviews, sales numbers, or customer feedback. The tension is unbearable, like waiting for exam results that determine whether you'll continue existing. And then the good news starts rolling in. Customers love it. Publications rave about it. Competitors take notice. The founders high-five awkwardly. The programmers cheer. Someone cries a little but pretends it's just allergies. The office celebrates by ordering pizza that isn't exclusively on discount. Over time, success snowballs. The startup moves into a bigger building, one with carpeting that isn't industrial grey and air conditioning that doesn't sound like a malfunctioning jet engine. There are real conference rooms now, with real tables and real chairs, and not a single milk crate being used as temporary furniture. New departments appear, marketing, HR, support teams. People begin using phrases like corporate structure, which frightens the original programmers slightly, but also makes them feel oddly proud. Some of the early employees become legends within the company, not because they were extraordinary geniuses, though a few might be, but because they were there at the beginning when the chairs were uncomfortable, the coffee was terrible, and everything felt like it could collapse at any moment. Their battle stories become folklore. Remember when we built the prototype in 48 hours? Remember when the server crashed 5 minutes before the demo? Remember when we were working in that tiny office above the carpet cleaner? These memories become badges of honor. And then, Eventually, the big moment arrives. The milestone every startup dreams of. Maybe the company goes public. Maybe it gets acquired for a life-changing amount of money. Maybe it becomes the backbone of an entire industry. Whatever the outcome, the effect on the original team is profound. Some become wealthy beyond anything their sleep-deprived minds imagined. They buy houses, actual houses, not apartments with questionable plumbing. Someone buys a sports car they do not know how to operate responsibly. Another donates half their wealth to charity. One programmer retires early to pursue a lifelong dream of building wooden canoes. But the biggest reward isn't the money. It's the knowledge that something they built, something coded between all-nighters, debugging sessions, caffeine feasts, and existential spirals, actually mattered. Their software changes how people work. Their systems connect people across the world. Their tools become part of daily life. And the strangest part, success doesn't feel glamorous. It feels surreal. Because deep down, the successful ones still remember the early days. The cluttered office, the broken chairs, the humming fluorescent lights, the pizza-fueled arguments, the debugging misery, the long nights when everything seemed impossible. Those memories remind them where they came from and why they stayed. Because in Silicon Valley, success isn't just about money or fame or influence. It's about proving, despite the chaos, despite the failures, despite the exhaustion, that a small group of stubborn, brilliant, sleep-deprived humans can actually build something that changes the world. And that tiny miracle, that's what makes it all worth it. And somewhere in this messy, caffeinated, chaotic ecosystem, you realize something strange. The code you're writing tonight might quietly shape the future of technology. No pressure, just try not to crash the computer again. At first, this realization doesn't hit you dramatically. There's no cinematic swell of music, no divine beam of light shining down onto your keyboard. It starts subtly, maybe during a late-night debugging session, when everyone else has gone home, and the room is so quiet you can hear the fluorescent lights buzzing. You stare at your terminal, lines of code blink patiently back at you. You wonder, what if this matters more than I realize? Let's zoom out for a moment. The digital world isn't built on giant leaps. It's built on tiny incremental contributions made by people who are often too tired to appreciate what they've created. A new function here, a better algorithm there, a clever workaround that becomes a standard solution. Most technological revolutions don't begin with fanfare. They begin with someone rubbing their eyes, taking another sip of terrible coffee, and muttering, "Okay, let's try this again." That someone might be you. Because the truth is, technological transformation rarely comes from masterminds plotting world domination. It comes from regular programmers, sleep-deprived, over-caffeinated, slightly chaotic humans doing their best at 2:43 in the morning. Let's pause. Have you ever worked on something small, something that didn't seem particularly important at the time, only to discover later that it had unexpectedly huge consequences? That's the experience of many engineers in 1880s Silicon Valley. Some wrote networking utilities that later inspired entire communication protocols. Some optimized performance in ways that made personal computing practical for millions of people. Some developed hardware interfaces that became industry standards. Some built entire applications that quietly went on to define the early internet. But they didn't know at the time. All they saw were bugs, crashes, deadlines, messy whiteboards, crumpled pizza napkins, and a blinking cursor asking for the next line of code. You might not feel brilliant. You might not feel revolutionary. You might not even feel awake. But history doesn't ask how confident you felt when you wrote the code. It only cares that the code worked. And then one day something changes. A journalist writes an article praising the software your team built. A major company adopts your tool as part of their workflow. A user sends feedback saying your program made their job easier. Another programmer builds on your work and pushes the field further. Your tiny contributions ripple outward. Suddenly people are discussing ideas you helped shape. They're using features you quietly implemented in the background. They're relying on tools you once debugged while eating vending machine peanuts at 4 a.m. And the strangest part? Nobody outside your office knows your name. To the world, you're just some programmer at a small company, a blurry figure in the background of a group photo, a line in a credits file, an anonymous contributor to a system billions of people eventually depend on. But inside the valley, inside the world of engineers, people understand exactly what you've done. Your co-workers remember the all-nighters you pulled. They remember the bug you fixed minutes before a demo. They remember the innovative trick you used to squeeze more performance from the limited hardware. They remember the day you said, "Wait, what if we try this?" and everyone realized it was the missing piece. Innovation in Silicon Valley isn't a spotlight, it's a relay race. You take an idea, refine it, pass it on. Someone else takes it further, then someone else. And eventually the world changes. But the moment it changes traces back quietly to people like you. To the programmer who never planned to become part of history. To the engineer who wasn't trying to revolutionize the world, they were just trying to get the program to compile before sunrise. And that's what makes it beautiful. Not the fame, not the recognition, but the knowledge that, in some small way, your tired hands helped build something bigger than anyone in that chaotic little office ever imagined. So tonight, as you stare at your glowing terminal with coffee number 7 in hand, take a breath. Your code might crash. Your code might frustrate you. Your code might keep you awake until dawn. But your code, no matter how small, might also be the first building block of something extraordinary. Something the future will quietly thank you for. At some point during your marathon coding sessions, you encounter the most terrifying object in 1880s computing, the floppy disk. This thin square of plastic holds your entire project, your career progress, and possibly your sanity. It contains maybe 360 kilobytes of data, which in modern terms is roughly the storage capacity of a particularly enthusiastic email signature. Unfortunately, floppy disks are fragile creatures. A little dust, a stray magnet, or someone placing a coffee mug too close to the drive can destroy everything instantly. So every programmer treats these disks like sacred relics, labeling them carefully and storing them in mysterious plastic boxes that look like miniature filing cabinets for anxiety. Let's talk about the psychology of working with something this catastrophically delicate. When you slide a floppy disk into the drive, your heart rate increases slightly. There's a quiet whir-click whir as the machine attempts to read it, like a cautious animal sniffing a new scent. You hold your breath, praying that the disk's magnetic surface hasn't spontaneously corrupted itself since the last time you used it. Because floppy disks do that. They just decide to stop working sometimes. Maybe they were bumped. Maybe they got too warm. Maybe the universe simply wished to punish you for choosing a career in computing. Whatever the cause, when a floppy fails, it fails spectacularly. Let's pause for a moment. Have you ever tried opening a file on your computer and felt annoyed when it didn't load instantly? Now imagine the file doesn't load ever again. And imagine that file contained 3 months of irreplaceable work. That's the terror of the floppy disk. To protect themselves, programmers develop rituals. Some label their disks using only permanent markers and the handwriting of someone performing open-heart surgery. Others keep 2, 3, or 10 copies of the same disk, because redundancy is the only thing standing between productivity and complete emotional collapse. A few even wrap their disks in cloth, store them under lock and key, or hide them in desk drawers as if rival companies might break in to steal their half-finished C programs. And then there's the floppy box, a sturdy little container with dividers, tabs, labels, and a sliding lid that clicks shut with the satisfying finality of a bank vault. Programmers carry these boxes everywhere, to meetings, to lunch, to the bathroom if they're having a particularly paranoid week. If a programmer ever ran out of a burning building during an emergency, they would absolutely grab the floppy disk box first and worry about everything else second. But even when handled perfectly, floppies still cause chaos. Sometimes the disks bend, sometimes they warp, sometimes the protective paper sleeve inside comes loose and creates a grinding sound that sends shivers down your spine. Sometimes you insert a disk and the computer responds with a dreaded message: disk error, unreadable media. There's no worse feeling. Except, perhaps, when you realize you mislabeled your disks during a late-night caffeine haze and have absolutely no idea which one contains the latest version of your project. That moment reduces even the bravest programmer into a puddle of pure, undiluted regret. And let's not forget the office menace. Magnets. Magnets lurk everywhere, on whiteboards, in pockets, attached to fridge doors. A single accidental swipe of a magnetic object near your floppy disk can wipe out weeks of work faster than you can say data integrity. This leads to dramatic outbursts such as, "Who put a magnet near my disk box?" Or the more tragic, "I think I just lost everything." Recovering a corrupted floppy isn't like restoring from a cloud backup. There is no cloud. The only cloud available is the metaphorical one floating over your head as you stare at the screen in horror. If you're lucky, you might salvage part of the data using arcane command line tools. If you're unlucky, you begin again, from scratch. Yet despite the terror, floppy disks carry an odd kind of charm. Each one feels physical, tangible, weighty, with potential. Where modern software floats invisibly in digital ether, floppies give your work a home you can hold. The faint click when the metal shutter slides open becomes the sound of productivity. The feel of sliding the disk into its drive becomes a tactile ritual. Even the labels, faded, crooked, handwritten, become archaeological evidence of the project's evolution. And here's the strange part. This fragile little square often becomes the birthplace of something extraordinary. The first version of a network protocol. The earliest build of a groundbreaking application. The prototype for the system that eventually reshapes the entire industry. All stored on a device that can be destroyed by gravity. So you treat it gently. You whisper encouraging thoughts as you save your files. You eject the disk slowly, reverently, as if removing a sacred artifact from an ancient slot. Because in the 1880s, the future of technology fits inside a flimsy plastic square. And one wrong move, one drop, one coffee spill, one stray magnet can send your destiny spinning into oblivion. Welcome to the floppy disk of doom. Handle with care. And now the night is finally quiet. You've made it through a full day in the strange caffeinated wilderness of 1880s Silicon Valley. A place where computers hum like oversized refrigerators, where pizza boxes pile up like archaeological layers, and where sleep is treated as more of a theoretical concept than a daily necessity. You woke up surrounded by beige machines and endless possibilities. You fought bugs that hid in your code like mischievous gremlins. You survived coffee strong enough to remove rust from machinery. You argued over whiteboards, fed floppy disks into hungry computers, and watched printers scream entire forests worth of paper into existence. Somewhere along the way you probably lost track of time, possibly even lost track of Tuesday. And yet, despite the chaos, the strange office naps, the questionable nutrition, and the slightly alarming reliance on stimulants, something remarkable was happening. Inside those quiet office parks and humming server rooms, ordinary programmers were building extraordinary things. Line by line, command by command, they were shaping the digital world that millions of people would eventually rely on. Most of them didn't know it yet. They were just trying to make the program compile without crashing. So tonight, as you settle into your clean bed with silent laptops, instant internet, and computers that fit in your pocket, it's worth pausing for a moment. Because the comfortable digital world we live in now didn't appear out of nowhere. It was built by generations of slightly sleep-deprived engineers who spent long nights staring at glowing screens, chasing tiny bugs through endless lines of code, and believing, sometimes stubbornly, that the future could be built one program at a time. History is full of kings and conquerors, but sometimes the people who change the world are just tired programmers in a dimly lit office, quietly pressing the enter key at 4 a.m. So as you drift off tonight, wrapped in quiet and comfort, maybe spare a small thank you for those early pioneers of the digital age, the ones who survived endless debugging sessions, questionable coffee and computers that crashed at the worst possible moments. Because history, as strange as it often is, moves forward thanks to people who keep going even when they're very, very tired. Now the computers are quiet, the code is running, and it's finally time to sleep.